Eva Benmela from DrEvaTherapy. I'm really excited today because I'm interviewing Dr. Marla. She is a holistic psychologist with over 25 years of experience working with all different types of individuals. She focuses on relationships, on enhanced communication, holistic psychology, and medicine. Thank you so much for being here with me today. I'm excited. We're going to talk about the topic of femininity and masculinity and how that relates to perfectionism.
It's absolutely my pleasure to be here and discuss this topic. It's something that there's sort of new ideas. And so I'm really excited to be able to offer some fresh perspective on this.
Something that we learn about in graduate school. I don't think it's something that most of us even hear about in society. And if you could just tell us a little bit about that. What is masculine and feminine energy? Do we each have both? Do women only have one, then the other? How does that work?
So the idea of masculine and feminine energy is irrespective of your actual gender or how you look, how you behave. It's more of a mindset that you go through life with, or the way that you react to certain situations, especially in relationships. So I focus on relationships a lot. So it's how people show up in relationships and maybe react to the different relationship situations. So an example of that is there's a breakdown that might seem stereotypical to people. And when I talk about masculine and feminine energy, sometimes people rail against the idea because many of us are taught to think of masculine and feminine as more egalitarian. So the idea of masculine and feminine energy sometimes seems like, oh, we're stereotyping women and women have to be a certain way, or we're stereotyping men and men need to be a certain way. But it's really what works in relationships from everything we've seen across the board, whether or not it seems fair.
Tell us a little bit more about that. Like, what is specifically feminine energy? Because you're saying it's not about how you look, but more about how you act. So what is feminine energy versus the masculine energy? What does that look like? What kind of mindsets are those?
The basic breakdown is that in relationships, and this is again a generalization, but it does seem to bear out in reality and in real relationships, that men are in charge of the pace of the relationship and how quickly a relationship moves along. So they are the active member of the relationship, and the women are more receptive, and they're in charge of the emotional component of the relationship. So the emotional energy, so to speak, in the relationship is the feminine, and the pace and the speed of the relationship is considered more masculine. So very often, especially because we women are so successful these days and we're doing things that men traditionally do, we've adopted a lot of masculine energy, and we tend to push relationships forward in a certain way that very often winds up leaving men feeling emasculated at times. They tend to leave a relationship or go cold, and they don't even necessarily know why. We also see this in terms of perfectionism, where we want to do everything perfectly, and we want to move our lives along in a perfect way. And that's also a masculine energy, the way we're moving our lives forward.
Such a good point, because I think for so many professional women, when we're in our work mode, we have to get things done. We need to be, we need to work, we need to do things, we need to take charge most of the time. We have to be responsible. But then what you're saying is when it comes to relationships, then somehow we have to kind of switch gears into this feminine mode of just kind of allowing and you've always said to me, the man takes care of more of the pace and the woman is the depth and the kind of the container for that kind of a relationship. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
So how do women, how do they make that switch? Because when they come home, a lot of times what we hear is, I have to do everything. He's not doing anything. I'm the one that starts from the beginning of the day till the end of the day, and he's sleeping in or he's watching TV. We're talking about heterosexual relationships, but that's the woman doing, and feeling more and more resentful. And like you were saying, the guy just not engaging as much. So how do women, what happens there?
So what happens is that dynamic is being set in place, it being set in motion way before the woman comes and says, I'm doing everything. There are things that she's doing from the beginning that are more masculine energy, and she could be in the most feminine, most beautiful. It has nothing to do with appearance or anything about, the woman as a woman, but she's already setting in place this masculine energy where she is maybe being controlling in certain ways, or pushing the relationship forward in a certain way, and the man will back off because he is sensing something in the woman's energy. Very often a masculine energy in a woman comes across as her being critical or controlling or complaining about what the man is doing and his not doing things perfectly to her standards. So that's a perfect example of masculine energy in perfectionism, is wanting things to be a certain way and attempting to get them done in that way, and not leaving room for the man to do something in the way he wants to do it or the way he sees fit to do it.
Like, as professional women, we have to make that conscious effort to maybe tone down that masculine energy when we're entering the relationship, while keeping it up and active when we're working.
Taking up both sides, and then not being happy when the man is not doing it the way she would potentially want him to do it. And then he gets to the point where he says, okay, nothing I'm doing is going to make her happy, so I'm just going to back up and let her do everything. And then the resentment builds. So it's this vicious cycle it's a very unconscious cycle that we get into, but you can trace it back to its origins in the beginning of a relationship.
And so I think too, what I've noticed is when, we're talking about the feminine energy being more sensitive, being more in depth, I've noticed that with a lot of people who are perfectionists, that emotional connection within themselves is silenced, because the focus is much more on getting things done, making sure it's on time, it's perfect, it's great, that however it is that they're feeling within is kind of put off to the side.
Relationships and professional careers are very different, but we tend to get into a groove, especially when we're used to running businesses and practices and families and homes, and we continue that into our relationships. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't belong in a relationship. It's a completely different paradigm in life.
And that's a good point. I think for a lot of people who are so much into the doing, that taking that time, which not necessarily is a lot of time, but taking that time to just kind of feel feelings that are beyond the exasperation, the frustration, the rushing, the angers at points, it's something that they're not looking forward to, because they think it's going to waste time to stop and feel.
There's definitely a disconnect between the doing and the being. And so I've spoken before about the idea of the human being and the human doing. And so many of us, especially when we're busy and we have children and again, the businesses and other things to do in our life, and we have packed lives, we become human doings. And we also become human doings in our relationships. Very often I will hear from couples and from the women in the couples who talk about their husbands in terms of helpers in their homes. And they don't help me with the children, and they're not doing enough in the home. And the home has become a place for just getting things done versus a place of being and a sanctuary. And how can people connect to their emotions in the home? So many homes are becoming devoid of emotions because of that. And so they might look perfect from the outside or even from the inside. Everything might be organized. The children might be going to school on time and have their homework and everything done perfectly. But there's no emotional component of the home. The home just becomes a place where we go and we do our lives. And that's a real disconnect from emotions and that other part. So there has to be a balance, yes, because we have to do things in life and there are responsibilities and things that must get done. But we also want to pay attention, especially as women, to what is the emotional temperature in the home? How are we setting the stage for that? Because that is our role in relationships and in life in general, I believe. That's the real purpose of being in a relationship or in a marriage or in a family, is the idea of love, and the idea of love is a verb. And because of that focus on human doing and the disconnect from the human being, very often we've stopped having loving behaviors in our home. Or we can look at the doing as loving.
Mm-hmm.
Natively doesn't feel like loving to the other members in the household necessarily, especially when there's the perfectionism going on.
Right. The outlook on it is, I'm doing this for you to make you better, or because I know that it's right, versus because I know that you're going to cherish and enjoy it, and that's why I'm doing this for you or with you.
Right. So I love you, and because I love you, I want to give you perfect enrichment, and I want to give you this perfect illusion of a life. But there's a lack of soul, or a lack of spirit in that, and a lack of being in that. Balance there. How do you intentionally balance the doing, which does have to happen, when people are first talking about these concepts of being and doing, what they'll say very often is, yeah, but you have to get stuff done, and you have to have goals, and you have to do things in life. And this is very true, but you can do things in a more intentional way. And that's really what this is when you are being intentionally feminine, you're looking at the being part of living and loving versus only the doing part.
Have that imbalance where they can be more masculine than feminine, or more feminine than masculine?
Absolutely. Men can completely, like workaholics, for example, men who are workaholics and who have no connection or limited connection to their emotion are over masculine. And we also have over feminine men who tend to be more concerned with the emotions or how they're feeling than the doing part. But because their role, and again, this is a stereotype, and there are so many reasons why these roles are in place and why they work, and social constructs dating back who knows how many thousands of years. This is just how we've developed. But men do want to be productive. That seems to be something that they say in general, that they feel best when they are being productive, when they are providing. And when they're moving things along in a proper path. That can get out of balance as well when they're only doing that and not paying attention to the emotional piece. But that masculine imbalance tends to be more feminine, as far as I can tell, and as far as what I've read in the research and the literature.
Okay. So, so perfectionism is more masculine. And a lot of times I think that perfectionism develops as a way of trying to have, again, masculine, the control, kind of that stability of, I know what's going to happen because I'm the one who's taking care of it to my liking. I know the best way. And it permeates in so many different areas of a relationship that we have. It could be perfectionism in our work, with our children, with our relationships, with our friends, our bodies, et cetera, that it almost becomes like the identity. What would be something that somebody could start doing to start tapping into the feminine after years or a lifetime of always being the one in control?
So I look at it, I try to keep concepts somewhat similar, especially complicated concepts like this. But what I would recommend, and what I do recommend, is that when you notice that you're being perfectionistic, there's typically an underlying fear. Anytime we're trying to control the environment or control how something happens, there's a fear behind that. So perfectionism and controlling behaviors come out of a place of fear. They don't come out of a bad place. They usually come out of a loving place, and we're afraid that something's not going to be ideal for our loved ones. And so you want to really understand what that fear is that's motivating it, and just tap into that when you have some awareness of, I'm being controlling here, I'm being perfectionistic here. So of course, the first step is understanding this behavior is perfectionistic. This behavior is controlling. I am doing something that is controlling. And then begin to understand what fear might be motivating this. You can figure that out in therapy. If you don't know what fears motivate you, or what fears create or initiate some of these behaviors, you can figure that out in therapy. You can you can read, you can do a lot of things to determine what the fear is, but just checking in with that fear is very helpful. Or even just knowing that this is coming from that place can be helpful.
Yeah.
Gentle with yourself too, that this is the perfectionistic tendencies, or the controlling tendencies, are really because you love and care a lot. And so that's one way to be gentle with yourself when considering that you're doing things that are not ideal. Even though you think they're ideal, right? Even though you think that they're going to lead to a perfect outcome.
Right. It's an eye-opener. It's definitely an eye-opener. And I love this topic of masculinity and femininity because, like we were saying in the beginning, it's not something that we're taught. It's not something that's, really easily talked about. Understanding that we each have both types of energies, and taking a step back and seeing, okay, well, what's my role in how I'm showing up in these relationships or in my life that is getting me into these patterns where I can't constantly keep blaming the other person. I have to look in within myself and see, well, like you were saying, what is that fear? What's that driving force that is not getting me what I want? Because I love and I care, but the response is not the one I'm looking for.
I have a question for you real quick. I know that you're like an expert in perfectionism, and this is something that you've focused on so much in your work, the idea of perfectionism and how that actually creates less than perfection. What are some of the things that you think about in terms of when someone is noticing their perfectionistic tendencies or they're being perfectionistic? Is that fear?
Yeah,
Look at
definitely. A lot of questions about self-worth, a lot of questions again about the identity and how that was formed. You know, were they always the helper? Were they praised for being the helper and the know-it-all and the responsible one? And how that shows up later on throughout their life. Feeling, I think maybe you and I have talked about this in the past, the conditionalities of love, right? That sometimes we feel like we need to show and prove things in order to be worthy of relationships.
and if we're not perfect, are we valuable?
Right.
Right? So if we're not perfect and we're not able to show value, we're afraid that we're not enough in that way.
Right.
A lot of judgment, right? And that definitely is where perfectionism begins, is in the self-judgment of things not being good enough.
Mhm.
Back to the feminine energy for a moment, in terms of the helper. A helper, when we become helpers, we are also doing, even though that seems like a very feminine role, a helper is someone who is helping to do something. And I encourage women to actually do less helping. Let their family members, let their husbands or partners figure out how to do things. Let their children figure things out on their own. Allow people to experience failure. It's liberating to know that you can actually have failure at something and navigate through it. That is what life is. So the helping through having things look perfect actually prevents the growth through failure and the growth through challenges, because we've tried to, we're afraid of this failure, and we're afraid of the discomfort that comes from that.
Right. And that's applicable to everything, right? That's applicable to parents, raising the little ones, then as they grow up through their teenage years, college. It's applicable to work-life relationships where you're trying to always save the day with how much you're doing at work, because if not, then everything will go downhill. Or if you're not there to make sure that the date is planned, then the date's not going to happen, and he's not going to call, and then you're not going to go out.
When I was raising my children, who are now adults, and they would have challenges like everyone else in life, and I would have challenges, and learning to embrace those instead of avoiding those and being afraid of those. So yay, you're having a challenge, and this is how you grow. This is how you learn to grow. Perfectionism is something that we've bought into that is actually the opposite of perfect. It's an unhealthy way of looking at the way things should be.
And problems that it does, because it's not real.
Yeah.
Amazing. I don't know if you have anything else you would like to add, but this has been just so informative, so helpful.
It's been great speaking with you, and I would love to do this in the future. Just these chats with you are great and always eye-opening as well. And I so appreciate your focus on the idea of perfectionism and the toll that it takes on families.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I want to thank you so much for being here. If you would like more information about Dr. Marla, you could check out the website zenmindspace.com, and you can check in with everything that Dr. Marla has going on. It's an amazing, amazing center. Thank you again so much for this talk today, and I hope you have a great day.
So thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.